Killing King Aerys Targaryen is undeniably the best thing that Jaime Lannister has done in his life. From a moral and consequential standpoint, it might be the best single thing that anyone in the world of Ice and Fire has done thus far. At least, in terms of the total people who were saved by this one act by this one person. Killing the king may have been the greatest good deed done in service of the most people with the fewest negative consequences that we've seen in the story so far. And although there is still plenty of story left to see, it is likely the most moral act that Jaime Lannister will do in his life. So then, it's very interesting that his entire existence has come to be defined by this act from a negative point of view. It's undeniably baffling, but incredibly meaningful that Jaime Lannister has become universally seen as the Kingslayer. Obviously, from a technical standpoint, Jaime is literally the Kingslayer. But given that King Aerys was obviously a massive danger to the highborn and lowborn in Westeros alike, and given that his deposition was a near necessity for the survival of many of the people in power in the Seven Kingdoms, it's fascinating that Jaime is so broadly disrespected and despised for killing him. Thematically, this dovetails well with Jaime Lannister's design as a character. The Lannisters, but Jaime in particular, are clearly meant to be an object lesson in that things aren't always as they appear. Although Sir Jaime is reviled for murdering the man he was meant to serve, he is still admired for many things that allow him to hide the darkest aspects of himself in plain sight. He's handsome, he's strong, he's an incredibly talented warrior, he's unfathomably wealthy, and he's a Lannister. All of these things grant him power, respect, and even admiration from people who never look beyond his surface appearance to see that he is self-absorbed, violent, cruel, dishonorable, and the kind of man who wouldn't hesitate to kill a child for his own benefit. And from that point of view, his reputation as the Kingslayer seems like a small price to pay in comparison to what he gets away with in reality. He did save countless lives by killing King Aerys, so he spends the rest of his life being shamed for his best act while mostly getting away with his worst. Again, so much of his character is about not seeing the truth behind the image of Jaime Lannister. So in a great twist of narrative irony, every vile thing that Jaime is capable of is hidden by the fact that he's rich and pretty. But the benevolence and moral righteousness that Jaime is capable of is hidden behind his reputation as a traitor. Of course, Jaime is at least partially to blame for his own public image. While most of the world was aware that King Aerys had gone mad and was willing to kill whoever he deemed to be a threat, they were not aware that the mass murder of King's Landing had become an inevitability so long as King Aerys remained on the Iron Throne. But when Robert's rebellion succeeds, Jaime does absolutely nothing to exonerate himself or explain the real threat that King Aerys posed. Not only does he allow everyone around him to believe the worst about him, he kills everyone else who was involved in the wildfire conspiracy, meaning that even if he wanted to reveal the truth, there is no one left to actually confirm what Jaime already knows to be true. Jaime's frustration at the presumption of his guilt is somewhat relatable, but it's also incredibly ironic that his unwillingness to explain what was actually happening could ultimately undo all of the good that he did by killing Aerys, simply because he kept the secret explosives under King's Landing a secret. Clearly, they still pose great danger, and if anyone decides to set the city ablaze, the consequences will be catastrophic. However, not everything can be laid at the feet of Jaime's quasi-tantrum about being mistrusted, and once again, the death of King Aerys and Jaime slaying his king is a very clear indication that appearances can be deceiving. Jaime Lannister and Ned Stark are foils to each other in many ways, so it should come as little surprise that Ned's interpretation of Jaime's actions largely mirrored how the world saw him in the aftermath of Robert's rebellion. In A Game of Thrones, Eddard II, Ned tells Robert, "I cannot answer for the gods, your grace. Only for what I found when I rode into the throne room that day," Ned said. Aerys was dead on the floor, drowned in his own blood. His dragon skull stared down from the walls. Lannister's men were everywhere. Jaime wore the white cloak of the Kingsguard over his golden armor. I can see him still. Even his sword was gilded. He was seated on the Iron Throne, high above his knights, wearing a helm fashioned into the shape of a lion's head. How he glittered. "This is well known," the king complained. "I was still mounted. I rode the length of the hall in silence, between the long rows of dragon skulls. It felt as though they were watching me, somehow. I stopped in front of the throne, looking up at him. His golden sword was across his legs, its edge red with the king's blood. My men were filling the room behind me. Lannister's men drew back. I never said a word. I looked at him seated there on the throne, and I waited. At last, Jaime laughed and got up. He took off his helm and he said to me, "Have no fear, Stark. I was only keeping it warm for our friend Robert. It's not a very comfortable seat, I'm afraid." And it's not until A Storm of Swords, Jaime 2, that we get to see Jaime's version of events. When he closed his eyes, it was Aerys Targaryen he saw, pacing alone in his throne room, picking at his scabbed and bleeding hands. The fool was always cutting himself on the blades and barbs of the Iron Throne. Jaime had slipped in through the king's door, clad in his golden armor, sword in hand. The golden armor, not the white. But no one ever remembers that. Would that I had taken off that damned cloak as well. When Aerys saw the blood on his blade, he demanded to know if it was Lord Tywin's. "I want him dead, the traitor. I want his head. You'll bring me his head or you'll burn with all the rest. All the traitors. Rossart says they are inside the walls. He's gone to make them a warm welcome." "Whose blood? Whose?" "Rossart's," answered Jaime. Those purple eyes grew huge then, and the royal mouth drooped open in shock. He lost control of his bowels, turned, and ran for the Iron Throne. Beneath the empty eyes of the skulls on the walls, Jaime hauled the last Dragon King bodily off the steps, squealing like a pig and smelling like a privy. A single slash across his throat was all it took to end it. So easy, he remembered thinking. A king should die harder than this. Rossart at least had tried to make a fight of it, though if truth be told, he fought like an alchemist. Queer that they never asked who killed Rossart. But of course, he was no one. Lowborn, hand for a fortnight, just another mad fancy of the Mad King. Sir Ellis Westerling and Lord Craig Hall and others of his father's knights burst into the hall in time to see the last of it, so there was no way for Jaime to vanish and let some braggart steal the praise or blame. It would be blame, he knew at once when he saw the way they looked at him. Though perhaps that was fear. Lannister or no, he was one of Aerys's 7. "The castle is ours, sir, and the city," Roland Crakehall told him, which was half true. Targaryen loyalists were still dying on the Serpentine Steps and in the armory. Gregor Clegane and Amory Lorch were scaling the walls of Maegor's Holdfast, and Ned Stark was leading his Northmen through the King's Gate even then. But Crakehall could not have known that. He had not seemed surprised to find Aerys slain. Jaime had been Lord Tywin's son long before he had been named to the Kingsguard. "Tell them the Mad King is dead," he commanded. "Spare all those who yield and hold them captive." "Shall I proclaim a new king as well?" Crakehall asked, and Jaime read the question plain. "Shall it be your father, or Robert Baratheon, or do you mean to try to make a new Dragon King?" He thought for a moment of the boy Viserys, fled to Dragonstone, and of Rhaegar's infant son Aegon, still in Maegor's with his mother. "A new Targaryen king, and my father is hand. How the wolves will howl, and the Stormlord choke with rage." For a moment he was tempted, until he glanced down again at the body on the floor, in its spreading pool of blood. His blood is in both of them, he thought. "Proclaim who you bloody well like," he told Crakehall. Then he climbed the Iron Throne and seated himself with his sword across his knees, to see who would come to claim the kingdom. As it happened, it had been Eddard Stark. "You had no right to judge me either, Stark." It's interesting, because Jaime recognizes that Ned isn't the only one who looks at him with mistrust and fear. And he also recognizes that at this moment, they're not seeing Jaime Lannister. They're seeing Tywin Lannister's son. And, while it was perhaps an inevitability that Jaime would become as cold and cruel as he did as a result of being raised in the image of a man like Tywin Lannister, it's incredibly meaningful that Jaime's understanding of himself wasn't radically changed by his father, but by becoming Kingsguard for King Aerys. He even tells Brienne, "It was that white cloak that soiled me, not the other way around." And there is undoubtedly at least some truth to that. Tywin is undeniably a terrible father, and there is no excusing the kind of things that Jaime has done. But more than once throughout his internal monologue, he thinks about the dissociative state he let himself go into in order to avoid dealing with the trauma that he can't physically escape while guarding King Aerys. Again, while he's with Brienne and she is about to be assaulted, Jaime tells her, "Let them do it and go away inside." That's what he'd done when the Starks had died before him. Lord Rickard cooking in his armor while his son Brandon strangled himself trying to save him. What he's describing here is pretty clearly dissociation, and he directly associates it with the violence he witnessed with the Mad King. So, it would seem that Jaime learned how to compartmentalize the most horrific parts of life during his tenure as Aerys' Kingsguard, which also paints his Kingslaying in a really meaningful light, even beyond the fact that it was arguably his most heroic act. Because, while he was making the right choice, his actions likely weren't a moral response, but a trauma response. Jaime's childhood at Casterly Rock was far from idyllic, but he became Kingsguard as a 15-year-old boy, where he was left isolated and alone in King's Landing, was subjected to a lot of horror, and most importantly learned that the Kingsguard, the supposed most honorable knights in the realm, were expected to not just sit by and watch while the king engaged in acts as brutal as violently violating his own wife or cooking men alive, but were actually expected to protect him with their lives until the bitter end, even when their king was as mad and cruel as King Aerys. So, it's not lacking in irony that the sadism of King Aerys was what hardened Jaime Lannister into the kind of man who could attempt to kill a child without thinking. But when it comes to Jaime's choice to actually commit treason and murder the king, it's once again fascinating that people begin to fear and disrespect Jaime for a decision that was almost certainly driven by extreme, continued trauma that King Aerys was inflicting upon him until his literal last gasp. Sir Ellis Westerling, Lord Roland Crakehall, and Ned Stark come upon Jaime sitting on the Iron Throne and see someone dangerous, frightening, and ruthless. But the Jaime that they're seeing is little more than a child who finally killed the man who tormented him. He killed the man who took away whatever morality lived inside Jaime before he became Kingsguard. Or rather, he killed the man who forced Jaime to leave whatever morality he had left behind when he became Kingsguard. So, the negative perception of Jaime stems from a few different aspects of King Aerys' murder. Significantly, the majority of Jaime's reputation is formed around a fundamental misunderstanding of what was actually happening when the Mad King was killed. But Jaime's sullied image is also driven not by the fact that he killed the king, but that he broke an oath. Once again, this is a fantastic object lesson in the fatal flaws of Westerosi society, because their social structure relies so heavily on a literal honor system, to the point where honor overrules basic, true morality. Jaime Lannister became frightening and reviled as the Kingslayer not because what he did was truly immoral, but because he, a Lannister and a Kingsguard, a man in incredible positions of power within their society, transgressed the rules that are meant to protect others in power in Westerosi society. It's not lacking in irony, then, that one of the key triggers of the War of the Five Kings involves many of Jaime's other most socially transgressive acts, namely sleeping with the Queen, sleeping with his sister, and the attempted murder of Bran Stark. So in that sense, Ned's wariness, and the wariness of nearly everyone else in the world, towards Jaime, is entirely justified. However, Jaime and Ned exist on two opposing extremes of Westerosi behavior, and neither of those extremes necessarily reflects well on them. Ned is often lauded for being incredibly morally upstanding, but in reality, he is far more concerned with not upsetting the status quo than he is about doing the right thing. He does plenty wrong, up to and including unjustly killing people, because he wants to follow the rules. But he is beloved among most because at the very least, he follows the rules. Conversely, Jaime Lannister is terrifying not because of his immorality. Fundamentally, many of his decisions are actually amoral in the sense that he is not considering whether or not it is objectively right or wrong when he does it. What frightens people about him is his willingness to transgress the fundamental rules of society. The trauma that Jaime experienced under the service of King Aerys seems to have led him to abandon whatever concept of morals he ever held in the first place. But Jaime is so reviled for Kingslaying not because what he did was wrong, but because it upset the designated order of the society that he lives in. Again, in a strange twist of irony, people are afraid of Jaime for the same reason that they were afraid of King Aerys. Yes, it's partially because they're dangerous, but it's also largely because they're willing to break protocol and upset the balance of their world. The vast majority of Jaime Lannister's transgressive acts have also been his worst. But the fact that he is most criticized for his best transgressive act is an indictment of Westerosi society rather than an indictment of Jaime himself. It's a living demonstration of the reality that order will always take precedence over justice in the world that Westeros's ruling class have built. Given the family that he was born into, and given that he has been capable of absolute horror without a second thought, it is entirely possible that Jaime never had a shot at being anyone other than the monster he became. But it was undoubtedly the trauma that King Aerys subjected Jaime Lannister to that made him capable of becoming the Kingslayer. But what do you think? Why is Jaime's murder of the king so reviled? Leave your comments and opinions below, and if you're interested in more content like this, like and subscribe.